I used to think playing dumb at work was just a survival skill. Smile, nod, ask harmless questions, let louder people feel smart. It kept me employed. It kept me invisible. And for a while, it even kept me safe. Then my manager started using my naivety like a tool. He'd loop me into meetings last minute, talk over me, volunteer my name for messy deliverables, and later message me, just say you misunderstood. It'll blow over. The first time I did it, I told myself it was office politics. The second time, I told myself I was being strategic. By the third time, I realized something. They weren't just taking advantage of me. They were building a story where I was the fall guy. And the only reason it worked was because I kept acting like I didn't see it. The meeting that made management go silent wasn't some dramatic blow-up. No yelling, no threats, no hero speech. It was me, sitting there with a notebook, asking one simple question like I genuinely didn't understand, and watching the room freeze when they realized I actually did. I work in operations at a mid-sized tech company, big enough to have process, small enough that the same 5 people decide everything. My job is vendor coordination and purchase orders. Boring until something goes wrong, and then suddenly everyone remembers your name. My manager, Derek, loved that. Derek was polished and loud in meetings, the kind of guy who says, "I'll take point," and then vanishes when it's time to deliver. He also avoided putting things in writing unless it made him look good. The first time he tried to pin something on me, it was a rush order. He told an engineering lead I'd confirmed a 3-day delivery. I hadn't. The engineer came at me hot. I pulled up the vendor email, and the anger cooled. Derek messaged me right after. "Quick heads up, I may have overcommitted. Just smooth it over." That was the rhythm. He overpromised. I absorbed the fallout. People forgot the details, but they remembered the feeling. Something went wrong, and I was nearby. A month later, it got personal. A software contract auto-renewed at a higher tier. Finance wanted to know why. Derek closed the door to a glass room and said, "I need you to own this one. Say you misunderstood the renewal date." I didn't argue. I leaned into the image he'd built. "Okay," I said, as if I was genuinely confused. "Can you forward me the email where I confirm the date? I just want to make sure I'm looking at the same thing." His eyes flickered. "There isn't an email. It was verbal." "Got it," I said, nodding like that was normal. Then I went back to my desk and started keeping a quiet timeline. Dates, meetings, screenshots, follow-ups. Not revenge, insurance. The real trap got set on a Thursday. Procurement had tightened approvals. Derek wanted a pricey agency for a marketing project. Got told no until we ran competitive bids and decided rules were optional. He told the agency to start work pending paperwork, then sent me a half-done purchase order and wrote, "Get this through. I already told them it's approved." It wasn't. It couldn't be. No bids, no director's sign-off. I replied carefully in Slack. "I can submit it, but procurement will reject without bids. Do you want to pause the agency until we're compliant?" He called instead of replying in text. "Stop being difficult," he said. "Submit it. If they ask questions, tell them you thought bids were in progress. You don't need to understand the politics." There was the script again. Me, confused. Him, decisive. Everyone else too busy to dig. So I submitted it exactly as he demanded, with the missing bids, and I attached the email where he instructed me to proceed. In the notes, I wrote one sentence. Submitting per Derek's direction. Competitive bids not yet provided. Procurement rejected it in 8 minutes. Derek appeared at my desk like a storm. "Why would you send it like that?" he hissed. "You made me look bad." I looked up, wide-eyed on purpose. "I thought you said it was approved. I didn't want to misrepresent anything. Should I have left out that bids weren't provided?" His jaw tightened. He glanced around, then forced a smile. "Just come to the meeting," he said. "We'll discuss." A calendar invite hit my inbox 30 seconds later. PO approval alignment. Attendees, me, Derek, procurement director, finance partner, HR business partner, and the COO. Boardroom A, Monday, 9 a.m. I stared at the invite longer than I should have. The COO almost never showed up for anything below fire level. If he was on the list, it meant someone above Derek had finally noticed the smoke. Derek walked past my desk an hour later, too cheerful, like he'd already decided how the story would be told. "Don't worry," he said, tapping my monitor with 2 fingers. "Just be honest in there. Keep it simple." Keep it simple. That was always the line right before someone made you complicated. All weekend, I did the most unglamorous prep imaginable. I printed the purchase order submission. I printed Derek's email. I pulled the procurement policy from our internal site and highlighted the section about competitive bids. I saved the Slack thread where he told me to submit it, and where I warned him it would be rejected. Then I put everything in a plain folder, like I was a freshman showing up to office hours. I wasn't planning to expose anyone. I wasn't trying to play hero. I just wanted one thing, for the truth to exist in the room, in a way nobody could talk around. Monday morning, I got to the office early. Not to impress anyone, just to sit at my desk, drink bad coffee, and let my pulse settle. When 8:58 hit, I picked up the folder and walked to Boardroom A. I accepted the invite, closed my laptop, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel anxious. I felt ready. I took a seat near the end of the table, folder closed, hands folded on top of it like I didn't quite know where to put them. The boardroom filled up in a familiar order. Procurement first, then finance, then HR. Derek came in last, confident, coffee in hand, already mid-sentence on a call he wanted everyone to see him on. He ended it with a laugh and dropped into his chair like this was his room. The COO joined exactly at 9. No greeting, no small talk. He nodded once and said, "Let's start." Derek didn't wait for permission. "So this should be quick," he said, leaning back. "We had a purchase order submitted that didn't meet procurement standards. Some confusion around process. I want to clear it up and move forward." He turned slightly toward me, just enough to make it subtle. This came down to a misunderstanding on execution. There it was. The word choice. Not accusation, just implication. The procurement director opened her laptop. The issue is straightforward. An agency was engaged without competitive bids or director approval. That's a policy violation. Derek nodded along, serious now. "Right, and we're addressing that. The submission came from my team, but—" He paused, glanced at me again. There was a breakdown in understanding the updated requirements. Everyone looked at me. I felt the familiar pressure, that quiet expectation that I'd just absorb it, nod, say I missed something. I could almost hear Derek's voice from past weeks. "Keep it simple." So I did. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Can I ask a clarifying question?" The COO looked at me for the first time. "Go ahead." I kept my tone genuinely unsure. "When you say breakdown in understanding, do you mean I misunderstood the policy, or that the policy wasn't followed?" There was a beat of silence. Derek jumped in quickly. "The policy's complex," he said. "It changes. That's why we rely on ops to manage details." I nodded slowly, like that made sense. "Okay, then just so I'm clear, if I receive an instruction to submit a PO before bids are complete, what's the correct action?" The procurement director answered before Derek could. "You should not submit. You pause the work until bids and approvals are in place." "Got it?" I said. I flipped open my folder, careful, unhurried. "That's what I thought." Derek straightened. "I don't think we need to get into hypotheticals." "I agree," I said quickly. "I just want to understand what I should have done differently." I slid one sheet of paper out of the folder and placed it on the table, angled toward the procurement director and the COO. Not shoved, not dramatic, just there. "This was the purchase order submission," I said. "You can see in the notes that I mentioned bids weren't provided yet." The procurement director leaned forward to read. Finance followed. Derek frowned. "Why would you include that?" I looked up at him, confused. "Because bids weren't provided. I didn't want to misstate anything." The COO's eyes moved from the paper to Derek. Did you instruct him to submit without bids? Derek laughed, short and sharp. That's not what happened. We discussed timing. He misunderstood urgency. I nodded again, almost relieved. Oh, then maybe this will help. I pulled out the email, the one where Derek wrote, "Get this through." I already told them it's approved. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't frame it as evidence. I just placed it next to the PO and said, this was the direction I was working from. That's why I was confused. The room went very still. The HR partner stopped typing. Finance closed his laptop halfway, like he didn't want to miss anything. The procurement director read the email twice. Derek's face changed. Not anger, not panic. Calculation. That email was taken out of context, he said. We were under time pressure. The COO held up a hand. Context doesn't override policy. Derek leaned forward now. Look, this is turning into something it doesn't need to be. The intent wasn't malicious. I didn't think it was, I said immediately. I just wanted to make sure I was following the right process. That's when it happened. The CO turned fully toward me and asked, "Did this happen before?" I hesitated, just long enough to seem uncertain. "I'm not sure," I said. "Similar situations, I guess. I usually try to smooth things over if there's confusion." Derek shot me a look, sharp and warning. But that was just the beginning. The procurement director spoke carefully. "We've had 3 rejected submissions from this team in the last quarter, all missing the same requirements." Finance nodded. "And 2 vendor escalations." The COO exhaled through his nose. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." Derek started to speak, then stopped. "We're pausing this engagement," the COO continued. "Procurement will review prior submissions from this team. HR, I want a compliance check on approvals and direction of work. And," he looked at me again, "I don't think you should be reporting into this process anymore." I blinked. "I'm sorry." "You followed policy," he said. "You documented. You flagged risks. That's what we want. We'll move you under procurement temporarily." Derek went pale. "That's not necessary." The COO didn't look at him. "It is." No one spoke after that. Not because they were told not to, but because there was nothing left to spin. And then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. The meeting didn't end with raised voices or a dramatic exit. It ended the way real damage usually does, quietly with action items and calendar holds. By noon, my reporting line was changed in the system. Not announced, just moved. My Slack permissions shifted. Procurement channels appeared in my sidebar. Derek stopped. No one said anything to me directly. That was the strangest part. People would glance over, hesitate, then ask neutral questions about work that technically wasn't mine anymore. The office felt like it had developed a draft, something invisible moving through it. Around 2 p.m., HR sent me a meeting invite. Process review, informational. 15 minutes. I brought the same folder. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to. The HR partner asked calm practice questions. Had I ever been instructed to proceed without approvals? Had I ever been asked to smooth things over with vendors or internal teams? Did I feel pressured to take responsibility for decisions I didn't make? I answered exactly, without embellishment. Dates, phrases, what was said, what wasn't. When I didn't remember something precisely, I said so. She nodded a lot and took notes like she already knew the ending. When it was over, she said, "You didn't do anything wrong. I want to be very clear about that." I thanked her and went back to my desk. What used to be my desk? My access badge still worked. My name was still on the seating chart, but it didn't feel like my place anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Derek didn't come by. He didn't message. He didn't call. For someone who thrived on constant control, the silence was loud. The next morning, procurement looped me into a compliance review thread. They weren't hunting for a villain. They were mapping a pattern. Timestamps, approvals, who said what, when exceptions were made and why. Derek's name came up again and again, not as an accusation, just as a node everything passed through. By Wednesday, people stopped pretending nothing was happening. A finance analyst I barely knew caught up with me at the coffee machine and said, "Hey, rough week, huh?" I shrugged. "Seems busy." She gave a tight smile. "For some people." At 11:17 a.m., Derek was pulled into a conference room. Glass walls, HR and legal inside. The door closed. No one stared. No one needed to. I wasn't invited. I didn't want to be. An hour later, his calendar went blank. That was when it finally hit me. This wasn't about that one purchase order. It never was. It was about how often he'd leaned on urgency to bypass rules, and how many times it had almost worked because someone else absorbed the risk. This time, it didn't. By Friday, an internal announcement went out, carefully worded, bloodless. Derek was transitioning out of his role, interim leadership assigned, process improvements underway. People congratulated me quietly, not for winning, for surviving. But the real shift happened that afternoon. The COO stopped by procurement, unannounced, asked how the week had gone, listened more than he spoke. Before he left, he turned to me. "You did the right thing by documenting," he said. "Most people don't." I nodded. I didn't want to make waves. He smiled faintly. "You didn't. You just stopped absorbing them." That night, I went home earlier than usual. No Slack pings, no follow-ups, just to be safe. I sat on my couch and realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't bracing for Monday. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. The following Monday felt different. Not dramatic, just clean. My new reporting line was finalized over the weekend. Procurement officially with a dotted line to the COO for anything cross-functional. No announcement, no applause. Just a quiet calendar update and a new set of priorities that made sense. Derek's name disappeared from systems the way people do when companies want them forgotten. No farewell email, no best of luck. By Tuesday, someone else had his office. I didn't feel triumphant. Mostly I felt lighter. The compliance review wrapped quickly after that, not because it was rushed, but because the trail was clear. Emails, Slacks, rejected POs, vendor escalations. The pattern didn't need interpretation. It spoke for itself. HR closed my portion with a single sentence in writing. No findings, no corrective action required. I printed it and put it in the same folder I'd brought to the meeting. Then I closed the folder for good. People started treating me differently. Not better, not worse. More carefully. When someone asked me to just push something through, they followed it with, "If that's okay by policy." When they weren't sure, they checked first. I stopped being the shock absorber. 2 weeks later, the COO asked me to sit in on a vendor review. Not to present, to observe. Halfway through, a director suggested skipping the step to keep momentum. The COO looked at me. "Thoughts?" I didn't hesitate. "We can do that," I said, "but it creates risk downstream. If we wait 48 hours, we stay compliant and still hit the deadline." He nodded. "Then we wait." No debate, no side conversation. Just a decision. After the meeting, he walked with me back to procurement. "You know why that worked?" he asked. "Because you backed it," I said. He shook his head. "Because you explained the cost. You weren't defensive. You weren't vague. You didn't play dumb, but you also didn't play aggressive." That night, I realized something that surprised me. I'd stopped acting naive. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I didn't need the armor anymore. A month later, I passed Derek in the lobby. He looked smaller somehow, not defeated, just ordinary. He nodded once like we were strangers who'd shared a flight delay. I nodded back. No words. I didn't replay the meeting in my head after that. Didn't rewrite conversations. Didn't imagine better lines. The story was finished. At work, my days got quieter. Fewer emergencies, more clarity. When something went wrong, it was discussed, fixed, documented, and owned by the person who made the call. At home, I slept better. Here's the part no one tells you about moments like that meeting. The power isn't in the silence that follows. It's in what doesn't happen afterward. No retaliation, no whispered blame, no second guessing yourself. Just a system correcting course because someone finally stopped carrying weight that wasn't theirs. I didn't beat management. I didn't outsmart anyone. I just asked one honest question backed by the truth and let it sit in the room. They went silent, and for the first time, I didn't need to fill the space.